Welcome to Making Special Education Actually Work, an online publication presented in blog and podcast form by KPS for Parents. As an added benefit to our subscribers and visitors to our site, we are making podcast versions of our text-only blog articles so that you can get the information you need on the go by downloading and listening at your convenience. We also occasionally conduct discussions with guest speakers via our podcast and transcribe the audio into text for our followers who prefer to read the content on our blog, where the use of visual aids, legal citations, and references to other websites are used to better illustrate our points and help you understand the information. These tools appear in the text-only portion of the blog post of which this podcast is a part. You will hear a distinctive sound during this podcast whenever reference is made to content that includes a link to another article, website, or download. Please refer back to the original blog article to access these resources. Today is July 18, 2024. This post and podcast is titled Project 2025 in Special Education, in which we discuss how the lives of children with disabilities and their families in the public education system would be impacted if Project 2025 is actually implemented following the November 2024 elections. Most people these days have now heard about Project 2025. It's now one of the most commonly searched terms on the internet these days. These fascist shysters aren't even trying to cover up what they are doing anymore. But what I want to emphasize as I start this post and podcast is that none of the Project 2025 agenda is anything new. And these are the same exact people we've been up against in public education at the local level for the entire time that I've worked as a special education lay advocate, paralegal, and educational consultant starting in 1991. These individuals now feel even more emboldened by their far-right leaders, and they are now done pretending that they work within public education to teach children. They are now openly acknowledging that they want to hijack our government of, for, and by the people so they can, among other horrible things, replace our public education system with programs of extremist indoctrination that promotes white male wealth at the expense of everyone else. They have never been in support of special education because people with disabilities, particularly if they are not white male landowners, are less than human to them. None of this is new. These are the same people who made the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, necessary in the first place. We wouldn't need laws that protect people with disabilities in our public schools, other government agencies, and the community at large if it weren't for these same exact people. For the same reasons that honor and ethics alone cannot be expected from Supreme Court justices without regulatory oversight, our public agencies from top to bottom cannot be expected to function in an honorable and ethical manner without controlling regulations and systems of accountability. It doesn't help that the people responsible for Project 2025 are almost guaranteed to themselves be mentally and or emotionally impaired in some kind of way, such that they are incapable of viewing other people as equal in worth to themselves and have a collective compulsion to identify classes of individuals to target for abuse for being different from themselves. There is no universe in which any of that kind of behavior reflects intact social-emotional development. It appears that nearly 1/3 of our population is personality disordered or similarly impaired. And the difficult thing about these types of disorders is that those who suffer from them are often incapable of understanding that they are the ones with the problems. This is why they consistently blame everyone else for the consequences of their own behaviors. There is no logic or mental health in any of it. Personality disorders in conditions with similar features have nothing to do with intelligence or communication abilities. Take, for example, the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who insists the Earth is only 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs and humans existed at the same time, thereby making the Flintstones historically accurate. One would think that he is cognitively intact enough to mentally process the facts and evidence to the contrary, and he technically is, but his social-emotional underdevelopment compels him to ignore facts that contradict his worldview, no matter how insane it is. The fact that he is communicatively adept also helps him superficially appear more competent than he really is, which is exactly what makes him and people like him so dangerous. People like this can pass as developmentally intact, at least temporarily, because they can successfully mimic the behaviors of intact people up to a point, but it's all scripted language and learned behaviors meant to help them navigate a world full of mostly sane people. They are masking to gain access to the things they need to meet their wants and needs, but they lack the social-emotional development to understand the perspectives of others and assume anyone who doesn't agree with them is automatically in the wrong. They are each the center of their own little personal universe universes functioning at an egocentric level that is age-typical in young children, but handicapping at ages beyond early childhood. Other people are simply objects in orbit around them, like furniture and buildings that are either useful to them in the moment or not, and every decision they make is entirely selfish. It doesn't even occur to people like this that other people have their own unique wants and needs that are often very different from their own, which is why they seek to create homogeneous rather than diverse communities and target anyone who disagrees with them with abuse. From a social-emotional developmental standpoint, they are like toddlers who don't want to share. They consider the conflicting needs of others to be an affront to themselves and use their adult-level knowledge, communication skills, and access to resources to pursue their selfish desires without regard for how their behaviors impact anyone else other than what they can get other people to do for them. With that in mind, I want to point out something obvious. Legitimately oppressed people do not have the means to book private jets to go protest their alleged oppression. I say that because individuals of the Project 2025 ilk did exactly that on January 6, 2021. Nobody just wakes up one day that dumb. This is the consequence of failing to grow all the way up from a social-emotional developmental standpoint. What this tells us is that privileged childhoods pose great risks of impairing children's social-emotional development and producing adults who view the world through the eyes of toddlers their entire lives, which is tragic. It's tragic because they are victims of circumstance that turn them into well-financed perpetrators of harm against the rest of us, carrying out the well-financed social-emotional agendas of toddlers using adult-level cognition and communication skills that allow them to pass as intact long enough to cause serious harm to all of us, and entirely lacking in the will or ability to take responsibility for what they've done. In every case that has not been resolved through responsible adult collaborations from my caseload over the years, it has always been because of these types of people who have managed to infiltrate public agency administrations who were or are at the heart of the conflicts. These are the administrators making $200,000 per year or more to deny children with disabilities the supports and services promised to them by law and funded by the tax-paying public. They will deny services and supports to eligible children because they don't want to pay for them. They think it's a waste of money to invest those taxpayer dollars into children with disabilities while lining their own pockets at taxpayer expense, as though they've done a service to the public by refusing to fund appropriate supports and services for children with disabilities. One of the earliest litigation cases around these issues, which set the stage for what would ultimately become the IDEA, was Park v. Pennsylvania. In that 1971 case, the public schools in Pennsylvania wouldn't even enroll students with disabilities, instead sending them home to languish without any kinds of services or education. This case laid the groundwork for what would become the IEP process by mandating the hiring of a psychologist and an attorney to develop a best practices model for creating individualized educational programs, or IEPs, for each student based on their individual unique learning needs. Getting the public schools to abide by any of this since then has been a challenge because of the anti-democratic individuals already employed within the public education system at and since that time. In 1971, public education administration was dominated by white men who wanted to use their positions to build their own personal wealth and become landowners at taxpayer expense. Women were largely limited to the classroom and support administrative staff at school sites and local school district offices. The public education system was created during the Industrial Revolution, following the passage of child labor laws intended to prevent children from being maimed and killed working in factories or otherwise running the streets unsupervised. Men ran the schools and harassed their female employees, resulting in teachers' unions being created around the same issues as those confronted by factory workers who were also unionizing at the time. Eventually, school district administrations became more visibly Karen-dominated than overtly male-dominated, but the Karens have always been acting according to the expectations of the men who control their lives, both at work and at home. They have always been willing to throw families under the school bus in exchange for the favor of the men who control how much disposable income and creature comforts they have in their lives. This is similar psychology as that found in women who help male rapists capture their victims, like Ghislaine Maxwell. The political divide has been present since our public education system was first created, with the haves trying to use it as a mechanism to maintain their relative positions of power and oppress the have-nots. These are the people who insist that our government needs to be run like a business, because businesses generate profits, not constituent outcomes, and they believe in sacrificing constituent outcomes to generate profit for themselves at taxpayer expense. None of these people could possibly make the same money in the private sector because they lack the competence to be successful at private sector level grift and would be lucky to be trusted with the responsibility of handing out flyers at the front door of a Walmart because they are so inherently self-serving and dishonest. People who cannot conceptualize the humanity of others will always put their own personal interest and greed before the welfare of others, and see nothing wrong with turning a public service responsibility into a profiteering grift. Like I said before, none of this is new, and it's what I've been fighting against since 1991. The rule of law is our shield and weapon for protecting the rights of individuals with disabilities in our publicly funded education programs and society at large. This is why parents have due process rights in the special education process and can file regulatory complaints with the state departments of education or the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, or OCR. You can see an example of what we've been able to accomplish using OCR complaints by clicking here. Readers and listeners may recall that upon being appointed by the 45th President as Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos immediately shut down OCR, even though federal law mandates its existence. Two nationwide nonprofit advocacy organizations banded together to sue DeVos and the U.S. Department of Education for shutting down OCR, but it took approximately 18 months of litigation before the courts ordered DeVos to reopen OCR, at which point it had a mountain of back-due complaints to investigate. OCR has been backlogged ever since, and the pandemic only made it 1,000 times worse. Investigations that the law requires be done in 180 days generally take over 2 years to get finished. Betsy DeVos already tried to hobble the U.S. Department of Education during the 45th presidential administration, and was temporarily successful until stopped by the courts. She openly admitted during her term that her goal was to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education and put an end to it. You will note that Project 2025 has that same objective. They've already tried to do this, and they make no bones about their intent to permanently shut it down if the 45th president becomes the 47th president in November 2024. Without the U.S. Department of Education, there is no IDEA, no OCR, and no due process. Section 504 would no longer apply to school-aged children because it only applies to federal agencies and entities that receive federal funding, like our public schools currently do. The ADA would theoretically still apply to students in private school programs and whatever kinds of indoctrination camps might be created in place of our public schools, but Project 2025 seeks to replace anyone employed within the public sector not sufficiently loyal to their chosen leader with individuals who put loyalty to their dear leader above the rule of law and the rights of others. It cannot be realistically expected that the Project 2025 people would lift a finger to help students with disabilities under such circumstances. In short, the implementation of Project 2025 spells an immediate end for special education and all of the legal protections currently afforded under law to students with disabilities. It's already hard enough now to get a free and appropriate public education, or FAPE, according to the applicable science and rule of law, because these people have been obstructing the legitimate functions of their government agencies this whole time. If they are allowed to have things their way after November 2024, all of the parents of children with special needs who are reading or listening to what I'm saying right now are going to find themselves stuck at home with their special needs kids with no school, no special needs child care, and therefore no way to hold down a job and take care of their families. It would only be a matter of time before a great many of our parents of special needs kids out there would lose their homes and end up on the street with their special needs kids in a world in which the Supreme Court has now said that homelessness can be regarded as illegal. Right now, regardless of who the Democrats put on their presidential ticket next November, voting for a blue bucket of mud would be better for children with disabilities, their families, and all the rest of us than voting for the Republican nominee. Voting for a president is not electing a king. It's electing an entire administration of people who are supervised by a president. Any president is the chief executive of a whole cabinet of people, and those people are, quite frankly, more important than who sits at the head of the table. The current administration has done more for the American people and the world at large, regardless of its president's age, because of all the other people working around him. Understand how our government is supposed to work and don't get it twisted. If the 45th president becomes the 47th president, Project 2025 tells you the exact kinds of people he'll have sitting on his cabinet and staffing our government agencies from top to bottom, many of whom are already on the inside just waiting for this moment, and they will all defer to him as their dictatorial leader as they implement their fascist fever dreams as fast as they can. When you're voting for a president, it's more about the team that person will bring into the office and less about the individual sitting at the head of the table than I think most people will realize. What team do you want making decisions about what happens to your child with special needs in your family? If you are eligible to do so, please vote in November 2024. Thank you for listening to the podcast version of Project 2025 in Special Education. KPS for Parents reminds its listeners that knowledge powers solutions for parents, and all eligible children, regardless of disability, are entitled to a free and appropriate public education. If you are a parent, education professional, or concerned taxpayer and have questions or comments about special education related matters, please email us at info@kpsforparents.org or post a comment to our blog. That's info@K as in knowledge, P as in powers, S as in solutions, the number 4, parents, PARENTS.org. We hope you found our information useful and look forward to bringing more useful information to you. Subscribe to our feed to make sure that you receive the latest information from Making Special Education Actually Work, an online publication of KPS for Parents. Find us online at kpsforparents.org. KPS for Parents is a nonprofit lay advocacy organization. The information provided by KPS for Parents in Making Special Education Actually Work is based on the professional experiences and opinions of KPS for Parents lay advocates and should not be construed as formal legal advice. If you require formal legal advice, please seek the counsel of a qualified attorney. All the content here is copyrighted by KPS for Parents, which reserves all rights.